You're listening to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of the best in contemporary a cappella. I'm Evan, and this week we're very happy to be joined by Elliott Von Wendt, the current music director for the now reigning ICCA champion Nor'easters and multiple award-winning arranger for the vocal company. Elliott came up as the music director and arranger for the Charlie Chords from Berkeley, but has since moved on to work with tons of groups in the Boston area, Tonal Recall, Treble on Huntington, and Upper Structure, just to name a few. If you're interested in arranging at all, I think you'll like this episode a lot. A real quick shout out before we get started to Justice Schmidt for letting me know our episodes have been too quiet, so hopefully this episode you'll hear Elliott's sweet bass voice in full HD. As I mentioned in the previous episode, if you have any suggestions, comments, ideas for guests, anything at all, never hesitate to message us on Facebook at facebook.com/headvoicepodcast. And without any further ado, episode 11 of Head Voice.
Hey guys, we're here with the awesome Elliott Von Wendt, and we're so happy to have him here today. So it seems like arranging is your forte, and so just starting off with that topic, we were just wondering, as an arranger, I'm sure you work with a bunch of different groups and have to create new arrangements weekly or daily even. So my first question is kind of, how do you, when you're working on so many different projects, how do you make sure that the current arrangement that you're working on really fits the group that you're making it for?
So I do tend to work on arrangements one at a time, which can be difficult when I have a lot of projects going at the same time, but that allows me to really focus on each group that I'm arranging for. And when I start out a project, especially if it's for a group that I don't know very well, I will do my research and I will look them up. And I'll listen to what they do, listen to what they sound like. I'll listen to the song that they wanted me to arrange. I'll ask them about what their current members of the group sound like, what their ranges are, if they sound good on certain things, if there's like a tenor that like can sing crazy high or can sing crazy low or anything in between. That allows me to have this palette to start working with where I can create an arrangement that works for that group specifically and isn't just kind of a quote-unquote cookie-cutter arrangement where it just sort of could work for everyone or not for anyone at all.
And after you've created a certain arrangement for this group or the voices that you're working with, do you go back to them and see if they want edits or if they think that fits their group and turn it to them for their input?
I do a little of both, I think. I don't know their group, even if I've done my research and see what they can do. So I will go back and ask how things are going, if they need any edits, if something is completely not singable, because that's a total possibility. So I'll do that, but I'll also turn it over to them. So if their music director has an idea of how to make it work for their group, or they want it to be very hands off and like they work on it, then that's totally okay too.
So I know you do a lot of that commission work, but you also have a lot of more long-standing, ongoing collaborations with a few groups in particular. So I know that you work with Tonal Recall and Treble on Huntington and Upper Structure a lot. What is it like working with a group in that capacity where, you know, you kind of get a better sense of how they each sound and what they're kind of going for more holistically?
Well, the cool thing of working with those sorts of groups where I consistently work with them is that since I already did the awkward, like, okay, how high can everyone sing? How low can everyone sing? All that. Since I've already done that, I have a better idea of what I want their arrangement to sound like and what I want the arrangement to actually do. So even though, say, for example, Tonal Recall and Upper Structure are both co-ed groups, and I do have my own style, you can hear that the two sounds that I have for each group are slightly different in a way that I can't really explain, but working with these groups over the course of a few years now has allowed me to sort of branch out and adapt my arranging style for them specifically.
And since you've worked with so many groups, I just wanted to bring up one example of how you arranged Lionheart, which is up for a Cara nom. So if everyone who's listening, you should go listen to Lionheart.
By the Octopodes.
By the Octopodes. And So I just wanted to ask for that specific arrangement. Where did you kind of start? What was like the starting point that you were in when you were first thinking about the arrangement?
So to be honest, when I first got the assignment for this arrangement and I was listening to the song, I thought, this is the weirdest song that I've ever heard. I was wrong, because then I had to arrange many weirder songs, and which is awesome. I love being challenged. I love like exploring new musical realms, but it was an odd song to arrange. It's traditional pop, but it's non-traditional in how the form works and how the chord progressions work, which is really cool. So after listening to it for a while, for some reason, the chord motif from the score of a movie called August Rush. I don't know if any of you guys have heard.
I love August Rush.
You like August Rush? It's so cool. It is a tearjerker. One of the final moments in that song where he's conducting his big like symphony, whatever, has this motif that goes throughout the entire piece, and it popped into my head in relation to which don't really go together. So once I started with just basically transcribing that chord progression, that was like the little like golden nugget of like inspiration, because then after that I was able to kind of push on and push forward with the arrangement. And then by the time I got to the end, if you haven't heard the ending yet, for all you people out there, spoiler alert, because it's a little weird. It was like 3 a.m, and I had been arranging this all day because they needed it as a very quick turnaround. And it was so late at night, and I just thought, what if this had like this crazy, like stupid, like barbershop-y sort of tag, but like on steroids? Like instead of 4 parts, it was like 20. It was arranged for recording, so like I didn't have to really worry about like part assignments. I knew that the minute I wrote this, it would never be able to be performed live because it's just like literally unsingable. But that happened, and I'm like on my computer in bed at 3 a.m, like giggling maniacally as I'm writing this ending. But I think it just sort of tied everything in together. The arrangement has a very cinematic sort of feel to it, which is cool because I love movie scores, and that was something that really drew me into music in the first place. So it was a really awesome way to sort of harken back to my original inspiration for music in the first place by doing this arrangement in that sort of cinematic, like big epic orchestral style.
Definitely. So I think what's really nice about your arrangements is that, as you'd mentioned, there's kind of this integration of movie scores that you can hear, and also a definite inspiration from kind of the choral tradition as well. But at the same time, you know, they're still very accessible and contemporary. So if you could just talk about kind of, expand on your inspiration and how you kind of look to weave them into your work in a way that's still fun and interesting to listen to for like the average listener.
Yeah, for sure. So this is kind of a 2-part answer for me, because it's my inspiration, but also my process, because they kind of go hand in hand, and they're a little bit non-traditional in a sense. So I'll start it with the process and just sort of go into how that goes into how everything inspires me. So I arrange in a very non-traditional way. I do not touch the notation or the sheet music until the very end of the arrangement. This was something that was actually taught to me by Shams, who you've had on your show, and I was really impressed with how the lines in his arrangements were so singable, yet they allowed for things like complex chord progressions or really big stunning moments while still being relatively easy to sing. And so he showed me this way to go about arranging, which was basically thinking about the entire thing backwards. A lot of times people, they open up their notation software and they start arranging right through there. Maybe they'll be playing the chords on the piano. Maybe they'll be kind of singing things to themselves. but they're writing the music out first, and then maybe they'll go back into like an audio program and record all the parts out after the fact. And if there's something that like wasn't singable or wasn't working, then they would go back in and they change the notation, and then you have your learning tracks and your sheet music separate. But for a while, like a few years ago, I was always stuck with arranging because I had that kind of common, like, oh no, what syllable do I use here? Oh no, like what should this line sound like? And that was getting me so stuck, and it was getting me in this kind of trap of kind of just using whole notes everywhere. And me trying to think of like a cool melodic line or harmonic line was difficult. But by going in and arranging by singing the parts first and basically harmonizing with myself, so I lay down the bass first and the solo, or as good of a solo as my bass singer, non-actual soloist voice can actually do, I would then go back and I would start harmonizing with myself as if I had my own kind of loop pedal, the way some people use loop pedals to create arrangements. I would go and I would start with like a tenor line, and then I harmonize below it and above it for the baritones and tenor ones. And then I would record like an alto or a mezzo line, and I would pitch it up an octave. So I sounded kind of like a chipmunk, but like I got the job done for doing a female part. And then I'd harmonize below and above that. I would add rhythmic lines. I would add counter melodies. I would add descant lines. I would add descant lines in the top soprano part. And that allowed me to really think horizontally as opposed to vertically. At Berklee, you're trained to write music in a very vertical sense. You're taught, okay, I have this chord. I need to move to this chord. How do I get there? You're thinking top down, bottom up, or whatever, going to the next top down, bottom up chord voicing. And it takes a lot to kind of think horizontally, which is how your line interacts with another line and how to make them singable, but still create an actual chord progression or an actual motif. So this ties into my inspiration for arranging as well, because I'm originally a string player. I play violin and viola, and string instruments, you are obviously taught to play them in a very horizontal sense. They can't really play chords. You really think about the line horizontally, the melody that you're playing, the progression that you're playing. So strings and vocals have a great deal in common with each other. They're both perfect pitch instruments. There's no keys, no buttons, nothing like that. So with string instruments, you can create these beautiful melodic lines that sound like singing. And that's what a lot of the great orchestral and cinematic music does, these singing beautiful string lines. So by arranging in this sort of backwards way, by singing it first and then notating, that allows me to create these musical lines that almost remind me of string parts for an orchestra, but are easy to sing and add up to these like big chord progressions or these big cool motifs that I was never able to get by notating first and then singing after.
That's a super interesting process to hear you talk about, because I think, when you hear, an arrangement that you do and like the best arrangements, I think it never feels like there's a part that's exposed, even if there's like weird, sound on stage or in a recording or something. You could pick out any part and it's like pleasant to listen to, which I think is so smart, because I know for me, and I'm probably for a lot of, arrangers starting out, when I was first arranging and, still now, it's like you can get into a mode where there's like just this one part stuck singing, eighth notes on an offbeat for like 16 measures, and that doesn't sound particularly nice or like it's not really leading anywhere. So that makes a lot of sense and is super interesting.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that is that you can still create those parts by singing it first, like the offbeat eighth note thing. But then because you're thinking of the part as how it relates to in the section while you're hearing the bass underneath you and you're hearing the soloist, you can learn how to integrate something like a repetitive part, because listen, there's so many repetitive parts even when you do an arrangement this way, but they fit a little differently. and they change a little differently as the section of the song, like the pre-chorus or the verse goes on. And that allows your group to perform it better, because now your altos, it's like always the altos. The altos aren't like, oh great, I'm singing like do 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 for like 20 bars, and then they look dead on stage, and then you're like trying to get them to like perform, but they can't perform because they're doing this like do 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 do, like they're doing that constantly. So writing these parts this way, it allows you to think in the mind of a singer already, and what a singer would do when they're hearing the solo and the bass and all these other parts going on around them. And so that kind of allows for the group to perform it way better, which makes them look better, which makes them sound better. And so everyone's happy.
And I also think an interesting thing about this particular approach that you have is that you're consciously aware of the particular part that you're singing and where it's going next. So I think that's crucial to voice leading, and it ensures that while you're making the arrangement, you're not giving a certain part an obscure jump or a weird transition. So I think it's a really interesting way to keep that in mind in particular, because if someone's not enjoying what they're singing, then they're not going to perform it as well. So I think that's a cool thing as well.
Exactly.
I was wondering, as another follow-up, you'd kind of mentioned this more horizontal process that you have versus the vertical thing. So, but at the same time, I think in listening to, some of your arrangements, you can definitely hear some more complex harmonic content in terms of the chords that you're using. Definitely some more dissonant extended chords. How do you kind of mesh those two things and still kind of get those nice little musical treats in there while still thinking of, I'm going to make each part on its own as strong as possible?
So there are two ways that I achieve that. The first way leads into the second way. So it starts with, say, I'll start with a 3-part pad in the men. So I'll sing my tenor 2 line, harmonize below and above that. That plus the bass, we have nice basic 4-part chord writing. Then that leads into the second thing, which is now in my alto or my mezzo or my soprano, wherever I want to put it. I'll then sing anything from a pedal tone. So just like how you would use a pedal tone in the bass, where they're singing the same note and the chord changes around it. You do the same thing, but you put the pedal in the upper note. And so the chords change underneath it. And so every now and again, you'll get a chord with a dissonant note. And that dissonant note is the pedal tone that the upper voice is holding out. So they don't have to sing a weird note or come in on this really off note. They're still singing the same note that they were holding, say, in the beginning of the bar. But then when the chords change underneath it, then it creates that really interesting dissonant sound that I love going towards. And that's not something that's like unique to me. I think I got it like directly from Eric Whitacre. And there's the Eric Whitacre plug. Folks, it took like how long for that to happen? So like easiest like 2 things you can see to illustrate this is the ending of Sleep and throughout the song A Boy and a Girl, where he'll hold the sopranos on one note and then the bottom voices will hold a chord and then change the chord, but the sopranos still holding out the same note, which creates a dissonant chord. And they're so easy to sing because you're not singing a note initially that's out of the scale or out of the chord that you're originally doing. Then when the chord changes, then the dissonance happens. It's tension and release, but without having to just like come right in on a weird note. So I use that a lot in my arrangements, using these pedal tones in the upper voices to create the illusion that some parts are singing these weird like chromatic or like weird dissonant things, when in actuality, they're just holding a note that was there in the first bar, the first beat, and the chord changes underneath it. And it creates this cool new tonality. So
that's a very, very smart way to do things. And I think that's really, I know that I'm going to apply that for myself personally. Another like technical arranging question. So, like you'll be, working on any particular song, and there's some songs that maybe are more straightforward and there's kind of just whatever, a piano and just pads in the background, and that's kind of easier to parse out. But say if you're working on a song that has a little bit more diversity of textures and instruments and things going on, how do you, when you're trying to integrate those into the arrangement, kind of keep it so that different parts aren't singing with, a different other part, like every single section, and kind of keep it pretty consistent? Because when we were both in the Troublemakers, you did an arrangement for us of Hymn for the Weekend by Coldplay, and what I really like about that is that it kind of just feels like, what you were mentioning, that it was essentially just two trios and then a bass, of a trio of men and a lower alto and then a trio of women. So like, how do you keep interest while kind of keeping those parts more or less together?
So the first thing I like to do is I like to think of emulation in arrangements as emulating idiomatically as opposed to emulating instrumentally. So rather than hearing like the piano doing like some sort of pattern, and then like, strings doing another pattern, and then like so on and so forth, I'll think, okay, well, what is this section of the song doing? Is it very sparse? Like, are there not a lot of instruments, but there's like one little piano doing like this little figure? Or is it very heavy and dense? Is it a drop? Is it a build-up? Like, what is it doing as opposed to what does it sound like? Then from there, so I have this like little formula that I use where basically the first verse and the bridge are like the lowest points that I'll go. And everything else is sort of a build to something. So the intro of the song, I'll either lift directly from the original song or what it's trying to do, or I'll start like at a low point and then build up from there. First verse is then little. It's tiny, basic, usually a solo bass and perk, or even just solo and bass, depending on like what it is. And that's not like that this isn't every time I do a song, but I found this works. I found that a lot of like modern a cappella arrangements follow this sort of formula, so it works. So hey, so pre-chorus build up. First chorus, it'll either be a little bit more in the chorus, or I'll just like to drop it down. And it's while I'm doing this, and again, I'm thinking horizontally. If I sing a line that sounds like a cool little motif, I'll think, oh, that's cool. I'll incorporate that somewhere else. I'll bring that back in the bridge, or I'll bring that back in the second chorus or third chorus or something. Or I'll hear something in the chorus that I think, oh yeah, I definitely want to repeat that in the next chorus. Or, oh, I only want this to be one thing that you hear. The bridge is then where I just drop back down. So basically we're building through the second chorus, and then I like to drop it right back down. So to use the example of Hymn for the Weekend, there's a part in the bridge of the song where it does drop back down, and it's just Beyonce singing the feeling drunk and high, that whole thing. And it's like her over like a piano, and it's like really soft and like really nice and like simply beautiful. And there isn't a lot of stuff going on because it's a Coldplay song. So, there are like 20 million things happening at once at any given time. So for the arrangement, I just did 4 parts, just 4-part harmonizing on that melody for the bridge, which was a nice change of texture, I think, because the rest of it was like these big pads going through these rhythmic lines, and then repeating the solo on certain phrases, and now it's just the sections, no solo, no perk, and it's just the sections doing that melody in 4-part harmony, like really hushed, really quietly, and then it repeats and things are being built back up. Some of the more pad elements are being introduced back in. And the cool thing about arranging in this way that I talked about earlier is that as you're going through the form, you can then look back and say, okay, that doesn't work, or oh, I should add this here, or I should take this out and move it or do whatever with it. So it's not like I'm done with the first verse and it's like, okay, that's it. Like, I'm not touching that again. On to the next thing. I kind of like to approach it kind of like painting, where you kind of get the sketch first, and then you go back and you fill in some of like the shading, and then you go back and you start coloring it, and then you go back and start adding some of the lighting, and then maybe at that point you'll change some of the coloring because now you find out that one of the colors didn't work, and then you go and you add some texture, and then you have the texture, and then realize, oh no, this lighting thing didn't work, let me change that. So it's a constant process of going back and looking at what you just had and making that work with the rest of the arrangement in order to create this sense of flow with the arrangement where it has differentiating factors of how each section sounds, but without being completely different than each prior section.
Right. And earlier you mentioned how a cappella music kind of has a basic structure to it, some like in terms of chords. But I also think that reharmonization is something that's becoming more popular in a cappella music. So I'm just wondering how you specifically consider that. And have you ever taken a pop song and reharmonized it? And how do you sort of approach it from that angle?
Yeah, so I love reharmonization. As a Berkeley kid, it's like the thing that I love forever and always. But the way that I love to approach it is simply from the bass line. Because that's how a lot of reharmonization works. You have your chord in the, like, say, like the right hand, if you're thinking about it like a piano, and then you have your bass note in the left hand. Again, if we're in this like piano mindset. So you can, a lot of the times, change the note of the bass and keep the chord, like the 3-part or whatever chord, the same, and the chord quality changes without you having to do like any crazy voice leading stuff. So even just having like C and G as like a pad going on, you can, in the bass, make that anything from a C chord to an F chord by just going up to an F, and you have C and G still there. Going up to A, and it's an A minor 7. You still have C and G in the left and the right hand. You can bring up to B flat, and you have this weird kind of like flat 70 sort of. Now I'm getting like into the really like nerdy stuff, so I hope this like even starts to make sense. So thinking about it as just taking the bass line and messing with that, as opposed to thinking like, okay, I have to create a really cool chord or else my arrangement is going to sound bad. Like, that's the thing that I don't like to do for the reason of just like, well, at that point it stops being something enjoyable to sing and starts becoming like me being selfish and me being like, okay, I want my arrangement to sound amazing, so I'm going to throw in all these crazy reharmonizations for no reason other than like I can do them. So I like, when I do reharmonize, I'll keep it so simple. I will keep it like to the bass line. I'll keep it like to me moving the bass up a little bit. Like, I'm a bass, so I love just like playing with bass lines and landing on like a different note than I would every 4 bars or something like that, and seeing how that plays out with the rest of the chord.
Totally. And I think it's interesting that you talk about, the balance of you as a musician, and a lot of people doing a cappella, there's like this desire to put your stamp on something and make it the most original while keeping it, but you also have to keep it accessible and, enjoyable for a listener. So as you had mentioned earlier, you are the music director for the Nor'easters, which I think is a really interesting position to be in, because the Nor'easters are kind of, the gold standard for Northeast a cappella, and I think a lot of groups look to the Nor'easters for inspiration or, for the bar of what groups should be sounding like. So being in charge of a group that has a very strong brand already, how do you go about taking risks and pushing the group forward?
That's a good question. So directing a group like the Nor'easters is crazy. It's unbelievable. I love it. Having that brand and having that musical sound already there, not having to teach it, not having to teach people how to like fully do like a sex breath or like a whatever, like people like love to emulate or whatever. Having that already there is so beneficial because it allows me to kind of jump in and start working with them with concepts that they already know and not have to spend time teaching. And so then when they bring in like new members, they're automatically introduced to that sound. At the same time, though, I love challenging this group so much. And I think I did so in 2 ways with our ICCA set. One of the songs we do is Creeks by Bon Iver. And it's kind of has like an Imogen Heapy, like kind of hide and seek kind of vibe to it, in that it's a melody played like on a vocoder or something. And so you have just like one melody and all these chords that go along with it sung at the exact same time, pitched up or down, to sound like this one big choir singing in homophony. The group had done another Bon Iver song called Woods a few years ago, and it's a song that they love and they will still sing. And it's similar. It has that sort of like layered, like all vocal sound to it, but it's much more loose. It's very improvisatory, free kind of feeling to it. It's very repetitive. Voices are kind of stacked up and then brought down. There are these little solos that come out, and it is beautiful. And so this song, when it was released very recently, Creeks, I heard it and thought, wow, it'd be really cool for the Nor'easters to do something that was pretty much straight choral. Like no real solos, no real improvisation or riffs, just straight choral, and see if they can infuse that like intense emotion storytelling that this group is known for into something that's very musically simple. And so the group knocked it out of the park. It's one of their favorite songs to do. I love whenever we do it, because they put all this like emotion into it, even though it's a very choral song. And it was tough getting to that point, because all of a sudden they had to be introduced to concepts such as like choral diction and like tall ahs, and not like like that belty scralty but rather like these beautiful like soft choral moments. And it's such a different sound for them, but at the same time it's not. It's this interesting duality of something new and something old, and they do an amazing job with it. And then the second thing is an arrangement of Intro by Ellie Goulding, and it's a song that is the intro for her album, and it's so weird. It's like this soprano melody that's very ethereal and high. There are no words, and there are these like strings and like and orchestral elements in the background, and it builds. There's like this Bollywood-ish sort of solo in the middle, and it leads into whatever her next track is. And I brought it to the group as sort of a transition piece into whatever our set would be later at ICCA, and they loved it. And the arrangement is really cool because it capitalizes on things that they do really well. So, for instance, the high soprano solo in the beginning, even though we have two stellar sopranos in the group, the soprano line is actually given to one of our tenors, Anthony, who has the treble voice of a angelic adjective that I cannot think of, but he's incredible. He can sing so high with this like pure, clean, like crystallized, like sort of tone. And so he has that melody while sopranos and mezzos are pedaling on these two notes that are also very high, pretty difficult, and it builds and builds. One of our other members, Rupal, takes over this like beautiful, like Carnatic, Bollywood-ish sort of solo that kind of at first is kind of buried underneath all these big chords, and then the ensemble drops out and she continues for a little bit, and then we use it to transition to our next song. So it's very soundscapey, very ambient, very weird, but it's again a new thing for them in terms of how this song goes and how it relates to what a quote unquote typical Nor'easters song would sound like, because it's very different. Both these songs are very different from like Elastic Heart or like Jaywalk or any of the song or What Now or any of the songs that Nor'easters are very known for doing, but it still sounds like them. So I think it kind of very eloquently kind of captures all the things that we were talking about earlier about making these arrangements work for each member of the group and each individual group to create a sound that they're known for that they can do very well while also still pushing them in a certain direction.
And I just want to do a little shout out to you because Elliott won Best Arrangement for Creeks at the Northeast semifinals. So just a little shout out to Elliott for that. So it looks like we're nearing the end of our session today. So I just wanted to ask before we finish, are there any trends in acapella that you see happening that you really like? And what's on the radar for you in the next couple of years? What are you hoping to do in the acapella community?
I'll start with what I hope to get out of, or what I hope to do, because it's something that I'm thinking of it as a non-student. I'm not a member of Northeastern University. I'm not a student of Northeastern University. I graduated from a different school 2 years ago. So I'm in this group that I'm singing in and music directing. So it's very non-standard. So it's something I'm thinking about all the time and trying to make heads or tails of. But I love music directing and singing with Nor'easters. So I want to continue to work with these amazing singers and create new exciting content that pushes them in these cool directions and also kind of showcases what they're already really known for doing. I want to continue arranging. Arranging is like the thing that I just 100% love. I don't write music. I don't compose. I don't do any of that. I love taking things that already exist and making them into something new while still retaining, obviously, that sense of what it was originally. So I look forward to being able to still work with all these great groups and arrange for them and develop my own style for these groups as well as my own thing. And then in terms of trends for where acapella is going, that's an interesting question, because while groups are still very much capitalizing on that big belty sound that the Nor'easters and some other groups are known for, and that's becoming the trend, I don't know. It's something I haven't really seen, because in the Northeast we're in this kind of acca bubble, and I hate that I just said the word acca bubble. We're in this bubble where basically a lot of the Northeast groups sound like that. They have that big, intense, powerful, epic sound. And then you look at some of the groups, say, on the West Coast, and they are still doing like big, epic, powerful, cool things, but they are a little more showy. They do more with the choreography. They do more with their like staging. Or you'll go to some other groups and they are doing like funny things and like more more comedic, like shtick sort of stuff. I'm looking at all male groups. No shade. I used to come from all male groups, so I can say that. But it's cool. We're still seeing. I think we still see all these different sort of a cappella genres, not so much just a cappella as a genre.
No, I think that's a great answer, because that's one of the big things that we want to, kind of push with the show is acapella not as like a thing in and of itself that you put in one box, but it's a tool to, tell different stories, or, use different colors to use your previous metaphor. But anyway, thank you again for joining us on the show today, Elliott. We really enjoyed having you, and we hope you'll join us next week for a new episode of Head Voice.
Thank you so much, guys.